Hi there, this is Matt with State of Flux, here with a review for the first 4 episodes of The Acolyte. The show is halfway done at this point, and I'm going to say sort of up front, give you a little backstory to how I came to this show before I discuss whether or not The Acolyte is actually The Acolyte, and an absolute shit show. Before I get into my thoughts on the show, it's time to talk a little bit about Disney Star Wars in general and how I have approached it post Rise of Skywalker. Rise of Skywalker was a movie that completely broke me. I had very little faith in it. I saw the film. It has likable qualities here and there, but it is a movie that just didn't work for me fundamentally, so much so that I just pulled out of Star Wars. I found that I had moved on from this show, this universe, this everything. So much so that I didn't even finish the last episode of The Mandalorian Season 1. I'd watched everything up until that point, but Star Wars broke me by that point, and I couldn't continue onwards. It was a weird thing. And since then, shy of the Obi-Wan show, which is something that I had to watch because I have absolute adoration of Ewan McGregor, I've largely stayed away from the Star Wars Disney shows. I haven't watched any of the additional stuff they've done with the Clone Wars or Bad Batch. I haven't watched the remainder of the Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett, which I do plan on tackling at some point because Robert Rodriguez had some involvement. He's a director I really like, especially with how he shoots action. I think he could make some very visually stunning stuff for Star Wars. I haven't watched any of Ahsoka. And I wasn't necessarily planning on watching this, though it intrigued me in the sense that was exploring territory left unexplored, which is something set so far removed prior to The Phantom Menace that we could get something kind of new. So that intrigued me a little bit, but the fact that it was still a prequel really rubbed me the wrong way. I don't really like prequels. Going backwards in time to recontextualize or further contextualize stuff you already know has never really been my bag. I've always been about pushing the story forward. It's okay to take a glimpse back, but to immerse ourselves so much prior to the events of the original Star Wars film has just weighed on me too much. And so I kind of was intrigued, but I wasn't necessarily planning to see it, kind of like everything else to that point. And then I saw The Phantom Menace, where it had the preview for this show and the extended clip, and I was really intrigued. It pulled me in and it convinced me to actually watch this show. And watch it I did. I've watched the first 4 episodes. And in the first 4 episodes, as they've been dropping on Disney Plus, there has been quite a bit of criticism hurled at this show for breaking canon and how it completely destabilizes that with which we already know about Star Wars. And part of me gets it. I do. But the other part of me recognizes this for what it is, which is batshit crazy. The Acolyte isn't that bad. Hot take. I like The Acolyte, and for most of the people that I've personally talked to, they have as well. The negativity swirling this is largely coming from a place of bad faith, shielded behind it breaks canon little tidbits, and then they throw out a little piece here and there of how the show does in fact break a canon or some form of canon. And I don't buy into that at all. I just do not. I cannot understand how you can be a Star Wars fan and claim that you don't like something in Star Wars because it breaks canon, because Star Wars has been doing that since the very effing beginning. Every era of Star Wars has broken canon in some way. This is the same franchise that gave us somehow Palpatine has returned. This is the same franchise that had, like, going back further than that, The Force Awakens undoes everything Return of the Jedi did. It just walks us back one whole movie and basically resets to the end of Empire Strikes Back. Just Solo is free from carbonite and Darth Vader has died and been redeemed or something. I don't know. But none of that really breaks canon. Star Wars definitely broke canon in Return of the Jedi by having Luke and Leia be siblings. That was not something that was clearly established before, and it's something that, if you watch the first movie, truly could never really be. But if you want to wash that away because there has been prequel stuff that came afterwards to further contextualize and help smooth out these rough edges. Even in Return of the Jedi, you have Leia say that she remembers her mother, but she couldn't have remembered her mother because it's very hard to remember something as you're blossoming out of a womb. Further than that, this is also the Luke, I am your father. That's the oldest thing, and obviously that wasn't ever originally part of the plan. Listen to Lucas even as he tells the story. He said that's the story it eventually became. This is the tragedy of Darth Vader. But as he was writing it, and you can read the first 7 drafts of Star Wars online, I promise you, nowhere is that to be found. And that's back when it was called The Adventures of Luke Starkiller and stuff like that. That was something that was a retcon. That was something that broke canon and upset people when Empire Strikes Back originally came out. If you want to go into other things that have broken canon, how about the Phantom Menace making Qui-Gon Jinn Obi-Wan's trainer when he says flat out in Empire Strikes Back that Master Yoda was the Jedi who trained him. There's any number of things in this franchise that breaks canon within the films that say that stuff out loud. And what people are getting upset about and nitpicking from this is the fact that, spoiler alert for episode 4, Coyote Mundi shows up for 37 seconds, and he can't possibly have been alive because, according to quote-unquote canon, he was born like 92 years before the Battle of Yavin, yet this story takes place 130-something years before the Battle of Yavin. But first of all, Coyote Mundi never says when his birthday is in any of the feature films that he appeared in, and the information for which came from a Legends book, which has no longer been canon since 2012. It's nonsense to get hung up on something like that. The fact that how could he not remember the Sith when clearly he and the Jedi are confronted by one in this show? Well, you know, the show is done as a mystery by its format and has not yet established what that villain is. Just because he is dressed all in dark garb and wielding a red lightsaber does not make him a Sith, or whoever is under that thing, a Sith. Just as Kylo Ren was not a Sith. He was one of the Knights of Ren. Yes, I know they established themselves after the Battle of Yavin, so it's not likely that this character is a Ren, but it could be something completely new and different. And you know what? Something new and different doesn't necessarily break canon, it adds to the canon. And even if this does turn out to be a Sith or Sith adjacent, like, why are we having this argument yet? The story isn't done being told, and this is one of the biggest problems with Star Wars, is that people get up in effing arms over things that isn't done yet. We made Rise of Skywalker happen because a whole populace got upset about it online, and Disney effing listened to the minority of loud effing voices who complained about that, so much so that they made an unwatchable film that walks back the entire film prior for the first hour of its runtime. Rise of Skywalker is garbage because it tried to walk back what Last Jedi did. Had J.J. Abrams been a filmmaker with a backbone and not a freaking amoeba, he would have made a film that took the toys that he was given and just played with them and came to a conclusion. Not unlike the Colin Trevorrow script that leaked online, that took the stuff from Last Skywalker and brought it to a conclusion that I think would have been largely liked by the general public, and I think has been established as being clearly a better screenplay than the one that ultimately was released in theaters as Rise of Skywalker. If you haven't read the Duel of the Fates script, it's pretty solid. I suggest seeking it out online, and not just the Cliff Notes, read the actual script. You can find it, read it. It's not bad. It's a pretty good sequel to Last Jedi. But when we sit here and nitpick something front to back, when we don't even have all the information yet ourselves, we're going to look like jackasses by the end of this, because the groundwork is actually laid, the story is complete, and if our voices are loud enough, they might start shifting gears to make an incomplete story or something like that, and I don't know what the benefit of that is. And the fact of the matter ultimately is, all of this shielding behind the like how it breaks canon, how there couldn't be a Sith because it contradicts a random line in Phantom Menace, which itself was a film that contradicted something that was a line in Empire Strikes Back with Obi-Wan having Qui-Gon as his master instead of Yoda, or the Jedi that trained him. It's all just bunk to shield and protect the people who are actually just trying to destabilize this show because of anti-woke nonsense. Dig deep in all the criticisms that you see from a large part of the people who are picking apart the show because of its canon flaws. You start seeing the same rhetoric over and over again of anti-woke nonsense. The morning that the fourth episode dropped, I went on to, I recommended the show to a friend who was like, dude, episode 4 is getting trashed online. So that's when I looked at the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and I did the thing that people generally don't do. I read the reviews. And first I read the critic reviews. Largely they were good. There was criticism to be had, and I'm going to get to my own criticism of the show pretty shortly here. But then when I went into the audience reviews, it was a regurgitation of the same kind of points over and over again, a lot of them talking about Ki-Adi-Mundi and how this completely bastardizes that canon, which isn't even really canon because it hasn't been canon since 2012, which is over 10 years ago, or it hasn't been officially changed as canon. Anyway, regardless, you saw the same regurgitation of rhetoric over and over and over again, and every once in a while they'd sneak a little anti-woke thing. They used a they-them pronoun in this show. They're pushing their agenda, yada yada. Meanwhile, that review itself, or criticism itself, is pushing its own agenda as well by wanting to take away pronouns. I don't know. It's all bunk. It's ridiculous. And if that is your line of thinking, I urge you to do something, and that is to watch something with a critical lens in good faith. Don't immediately turn away from it just because it has something that may quote-unquote offend you or bother you just through the use of inclusion. And watch something and see if there's anything that you can take away from it. What I was shocked to see was like a string of 20 in a row half-star reviews, all regurgitating the same thing. And that's just not plausible to have like 20 uninterrupted half-star reviews. That's bot behavior right there, if ever there was one. And if it's not bot, it's review bombing at its like most obvious. And it's ridiculous. By doing that, you're going to get the audience review completely taken off of the website, and I don't know what you're going to use to accomplish your means after that. I think it's a good idea at this point because clearly the system is flawed. And speaking of flawed, The Acolyte, well, a show that I like and do recommend, suffers from some things. I think it's approach to storytelling is interesting. I like that it gives you kind of 1 or 2 episodes laying out the groundwork for this mystery of a duo of characters who are trying to sort of take down the Jedi from within, based on this thing that happened in the past, having episode 3 be the framework of going back, lost style, and giving us context for why that is, and why this mystery character is slaughtering the Jedi that went there to initiate contact with them in the first place, is a pretty intriguing concept. It's good. However, the way it's written is, in my mind, this did not need to be 6 or 8 episodes. This is 5-6 episodes max. There's a lot of filler here, and it's kind of apparent in its pacing. And so I do think that you could restructure this story and do it cleaner in a smaller amount of time. I know you want to hit those 8 episode run times, but I think Obi-Wan kind of did it best, and even that itself was a bit overlong, by truncating it even further than 8. You don't need to have as many episodes in something like this. So truncating the show probably would benefit the overall experience of the show. The other thing that I think is a valid criticism of it is some of the performance work. Now, the actors across the board in the show are good actors. I don't want to flaw any of them, because they are all talented people in their own right. That said, specifically speaking with the Force-using characters in this show, there's almost a Spock Vulcan situation going on, where you have a character like a Vulcan, right, that is emotionless. We all know this. It's very easy to play a character so reserved that they come off kind of bland or not really like they're present in the scene. And I think that specifically with 1 or 2 of the Force users in this show, that reads pretty strong, that they're trying to pull back any kind of emotion because a Jedi doesn't offer that, so much so that it's kind of reading as if they're not invested or not interested in being in the show. And I don't believe that that's the case. I think it's a clear choice made both by the actor as well as something provided by the directors directing and trying to extrapolate performance from these people, but it does read kind of strange. Also, something that's just kind of strange in going to Coruscant so often. We saw lively brimming Coruscant in 3 separate movies in the prequel era, and it's got this life and vibrancy. And the show does a good job at establishing that and giving us the great sweeping exterior shots. But whenever we go into Coruscant and spend time with the Jedi there, it's just like them against plain bland wall, which kind of happened in the prequels, but George Lucas found a way to infuse life in most of the scenes unless you were really supposed to strictly pay attention to what was happening between 1 or 2 characters. Often those scenes included Palpatine himself and Anakin. Those scenes have very little life or movement in the background because your attention is supposed to be locked on those 2 characters and what is being said. However, in almost every other shot, you had beautiful window shots seeing out into Coruscant skyline. You saw life, just Jedis walking about and doing stuff like that. And here it just looks like a really kind of bland set behind them, and having actors having their like traditional Star Wars stilted dialogue, talking back and forth and rapping with each other. And it just kind of loses the sweeping quality that Lucas always was able to maintain. Here on the show, it just reads a touch artificial, and this was something that I had a bit of a problem with Obi-Wan as well. But I gotta say, I'm excited to see where this show is going. One last criticism that I have with this, but it's not necessarily with this, it's with kind of all things post-Lost, is all you really need to watch serialized television anymore is the first 10 minutes and the last 10 minutes of any show post Lost, and you should be good. The middle seems by and large dismissible. Like, important character stuff happens there, but really all the information you truly need comes in like that 20-minute segment at the beginning and ending of every show. You see this with Game of Thrones, you see this with virtually every show, especially in the sci-fi fantasy realm, and that comes straight out of Lost. Lost was kind of the kingdom of that format, and this definitely offers that. Every episode has a pretty engaging opening scene or opening two scenes. You get the Acolyte. The scene that immediately follows is usually a pretty solid character beat that offers some context of importance. And then the middle section drags. You don't necessarily need to watch it, and then watch the last 10 minutes where something major happens, and then credits. It's recognized, I see it, but that's a criticism I have with basically all television post the Lost era. But I'm engaged. I want to see where this goes. I don't think that character is necessarily going to be a Sith. My biggest fear when watching hearing the announcement of the show and watching the first preview was that this was all going to be some tie to Darth Plagueis or Palpatine, God forbid. And largely we haven't gotten that. I would have thought that the first Jedi we would have been introduced to that is somebody we're familiar with would have been Yoda, but that didn't happen. It ended up being Carrie-Anne, and like, that's cool. There's stuff I like in every single one of these episodes, and there's stuff that I don't. I do like the sort of, like, there's a lot of shots, tighter shots of the lightsaber, and I really like the animation they've done on the lightsaber. It has an authenticity that I haven't really seen, and a flicker to it that I haven't seen since the original Star Wars movies, like Hope Empire. Had like a buzz that you saw off of the lightsabers, and I'm not talking like the flicker that you would see out of Kylo Ren's or anything like that. I'm talking like just like you bought that was a plasma beam that was just kind of like warbling, and by the prequel era that never really happened. You heard the buzz, but you didn't really see it. This kind of brings that, and you're seeing it in close-up in several shots, especially in the opening of that first episode, and whenever the yellow lightsaber comes out, there's some pretty nifty shots of it. That's something that I dug. There's a lot to like, and what I'm saying is, if you haven't had a chance to watch the show, or you've just exclusively been listening to the negativity that's happening online, don't be fed that BS, because it's not coming from a place of good criticism. A place of good or fair criticism comes from actually sitting down, watching something with an open mind, and allowing yourself to have a chance. I just spent the first 5 minutes of this video explaining my displeasure with much of Star Wars that we've gotten in the past, based on even a revolting response to a movie that I think, frankly, is like very watchable but not particularly good. And if I can set aside those reservations and watch this show, which is not a bad show, then I feel like you can do that too. And it's worth giving it a shot. At least you will have done it in fairness. And that is the important part. That's what I'm leaving off for you. I'll probably do a wrap-up video for the whole series once the season is done. I don't know if this is going to be a continued show or if this is just a one and done. I'm kind of hoping one and done, but after I watch this, I do hear that Andor is phenomenal. I'll probably watch that because I'll want to watch something like truly amazing, and I might rewatch and give Mandalorian a fair shot, as well as Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka as well. So you'll probably see those reviews in the offing. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought of The Acolyte in the comments down below, and if you're going to attack me, that's fine. that's completely fair. There is criticism to be had with this show, just as there's criticism to be had with everything. All Star Wars movies, all Star Wars books, for which I'll be upfront. I have no reverence whatsoever for the canon established in those legacy books. There's a couple of them that I've read that I really quite like. Most of them, especially the ones a lot of people really love, left me kind of cold. I'm not a huge Timothy Zahn fan. His trilogy of books, Heir to the Empire and all that stuff, are purely okay. I know a lot of people love them. I think that has more to do with nostalgia than most else. I did really like Darth Plagueis. That is a really genuinely good book, and one that I own to this day. But I think that's the only legacy book that or Legends book that I own. Anyway, if you want to attack me, that's perfectly fine, but just be respectful about it. Don't be hammering names at me. But I do urge you to criticize my criticism, as long as you're doing it fairly. Thanks for watching, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Peace.